Story 1. My mom had an affair with my boyfriend. This happened about 15 years ago when I was 25. At the time, I believed I had a functional family, even if there were certain peculiarities. My dad was the typical hardworking, devoted man who did everything for his family. He was stable, dependable, and rarely caused conflict. My mom, on the other hand, was the opposite. Charismatic, vain, and full of energy, as if she were living in eternal youth. She was the kind of person who turned heads wherever she went. Behind this facade of vitality, however, there was something darker. Rumors had always circulated in the family that my mom had extramarital affairs. Aunts and cousins would make discreet comments at gatherings, but no one had the courage to confront her. Least of all my dad, who seemed blind to her alleged betrayals. To him, my mom was untouchable, almost perfect. I grew up watching this dynamic, but I never thought it could affect me directly. I always figured that if the rumors were true, they were issues between her and my dad, not something that could interfere with my personal life. On the surface, my relationship with her was good. I saw her as someone full of life, but I also noticed a side of her that always needed to be in control, as if she manipulated situations and people around her to get what she wanted. At the time, I was very close to my dad. He was my rock, while my mom was someone I admired but also felt a certain emotional distance from. Despite this, I believed that if I ever needed her, she would stand by me. It was during a night out with friends that I met Andrew. I'm not sure if it was his confident demeanor or his charm, but something about him immediately caught my attention. He was captivating, the kind of person who seemed to know exactly what to say and how to act to win people over. To my surprise, he showed an intense interest in me from the start. His gestures, his looks, it was as if he were determined to win me over. In the first few months, our relationship seemed perfect. He was attentive, a great listener, and made a point of showing how much he valued me. So, I didn't hesitate to introduce him to my family. On his first visit to my house, he was extremely friendly with everyone, especially with my mom. She, in turn, seemed genuinely charmed by him. I thought it was normal. After all, she was always an outgoing person. As time passed, Andrew became a regular presence in our house, and that's when I started to notice something that bothered me. Whenever he and my mom were in the same room, their conversations flowed effortlessly, almost as if they already knew each other. She seemed to know too much about him, his preferences, his quirks, even his favorite movies. At first, I thought he had simply mentioned those things in conversations and she had paid attention. What unsettled me was how he also seemed to know her on a deeper level than I thought was appropriate. He'd make casual remarks about her likes or little habits she had, things I had never mentioned to him. When I asked how he knew these things, he gave evasive answers, saying she mentioned it once, or claiming it was just a coincidence. The unease grew, but I brushed it off, thinking I might be overanalyzing things. Little did I know that the truth was worse than anything I could have imagined. The discomfort that arose whenever someone made a casual remark about how well they got along was the strangest part. Sometimes my dad or even I would comment on how friendly they seemed with each other, and they'd quickly change the subject or give nervous laughs. It was as though there was something they didn't want noticed but couldn't completely hide. I began to feel excluded in my own relationship. Whatever was between them seemed deeper or more significant than what I was building with Andrew. It didn't make sense to me, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave me alone. The unease consumed me, robbing me of sleep. The disjointed conversations, the averted glances, and the way my boyfriend and my mom seemed to share something I couldn't comprehend began to eat away at me. I tried to rationalize it, convincing myself it was all in my head. But each day, the signs grew clearer, even if I couldn't piece them together logically. One night, while talking to a close friend, I opened up about my feelings. She listened attentively and, after a long pause, suggested something I would never have considered on my own: consulting a tarot reader. If you're this confused and don't know who to trust, maybe the cards can give you some clarity, she said. At first, I hesitated. I'd never done anything like that before and thought it was just superstition. But after several more sleepless nights, I decided to give it a try. My friend accompanied me to see a woman she trusted, someone she claimed always offered clear and accurate insights. When we arrived, I explained that I felt something was wrong in my life but avoided sharing details. I didn't want to influence what she might say. The tarot reader listened, shuffled the cards, and began her reading. With each card she flipped, her expression grew more serious. When she finished, she looked at me with a mix of compassion and caution. "I see something very complicated here," she began. "Your mother and your boyfriend. They're involved in a way that goes far beyond what you imagine. This didn't start recently. In fact, this affair has been going on for years." My body froze. She continued, "He didn't get close to you by chance. He saw in you an opportunity to stay near her without arousing suspicion. You're like a bridge between them." I could barely process what I was hearing. I tried to argue, saying our relationship was recent, but she was firm. "Their relationship predates yours. They were already involved when he started pursuing you." My head spun. Suddenly, all the pieces I couldn't fit together before clicked into place. The details my mom knew about him, the casual intimacy they shared, the nervous glances. It all screamed the truth now. Before I could ask anything else, the tarot reader added something that froze me even more. Confronting them could have serious consequences. Your father wouldn't be able to handle finding out about this. He seems emotionally fragile, and the revelation of this betrayal could push him to a dangerous extreme. Her words hit me like a blow. What was I supposed to do with this information? Confronting them meant risking my dad's mental health, but keeping silent felt unbearable. For the first time, I truly felt trapped. I didn't know what to do with that information. On one hand, I felt an overwhelming rage toward my mother and my boyfriend. On the other, the fear of completely destroying my family kept me from making any impulsive decisions. When I left the tarot reader, it felt as though my entire life had been turned upside down. There was no doubt whatever I chose to do next would change everything, but I still didn't know what that choice would be. In the days following the discovery, I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, disgust, and confusion came in waves, paralyzing me and making me question everything around me. I couldn't decide what was more devastating: the cruel betrayal by my mother or the calculated way she maintained her facade. She wasn't just my mother. She was supposed to be the person who protected and guided me. Still, the tarot reader's warning echoed in my mind. Confronting my mother and boyfriend could destroy my father, and I couldn't carry that guilt. I knew he wouldn't survive it, and I couldn't bear to be responsible for shattering the one person who had always supported me. With that weight on my shoulders, I decided to follow the card's advice. I didn't confront anyone. Instead, I quietly ended my relationship with my boyfriend without providing specifics. I used a simple excuse. I told him I no longer felt the same and needed time for myself. He was furious, but I knew his anger wasn't about me. It was about losing his alibi, the perfect excuse to visit my house and stay close to my mother. Even after the breakup, I continued living with my parents for another year. Pretending everything was normal was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every dinner, every casual encounter in the hallway, I struggled not to explode with indignation when I saw my mother. She, on the other hand, seemed to sense that something had changed. On rare occasions, she'd make comments that sounded like veiled apologies, but I never reciprocated. I simply stayed cold and distant. Eventually, I got a job and used it as an excuse to move out. I told them it was time for me to gain independence, but in reality, I needed to escape that house and the constant presence of my mother. Even after moving out, I continued visiting my father regularly, doing my best to avoid her. In the years that followed, the distance between my mother and me only grew. Today, I can barely look at her without feeling a mix of contempt and hurt. I'm almost certain she knows I found out. She avoids meeting my eyes, and our few conversations are laden with tension. On the other hand, I've maintained a strong relationship with my father, visiting him often and showing him the love and appreciation he's always deserved. Although I've moved past the emotional weight of that time, my mother remains a shadow in my life. What hurts the most isn't just the betrayal, it's the fact that she never tried to change. To her, it all seemed like a game, a field of manipulation where her desires always came before the consequences. Today, my life is peaceful. I have my own family and have built a home grounded in respect and honesty. But I'll never forget the lesson I learned. Sometimes, the people who should protect and love you unconditionally aren't really on your side. Story 2. My boyfriend's mother. I remember exactly the day I met his family. We had been together for 6 months when he invited me to lunch at his mother's house. He said she wanted to meet me, and I accepted without much thought. It felt natural. After all, our relationship seemed to be going well, and I wanted to be part of his life. When we arrived, she was already waiting for us at the door, wearing a smile that seemed slightly forced. "So, you're the famous girlfriend my son's been talking about," she said, shaking my hand with a grip that was just a little too firm. There were no hugs or warm welcomes. She was analyzing me, though I couldn't quite figure out how. The lunch was simple, but every moment felt calculated. She asked typical questions, but always added a comment at the end that left me feeling uneasy. When I mentioned my job, she said, communications. Interesting. You must have a lot of free time then, don't you? It was as if every response I gave was being evaluated and subtly used against me. His older brother was there too. He was quiet and serious, nodding in agreement with everything their mother said. When she mentioned one of his ex-girlfriends who, in her words, wasn't good enough, he laughed and changed the subject, not seeming to grasp the full implication of her remark. The youngest brother arrived later, cheerful and laid back, but she quickly pulled him aside for a private conversation. When he returned, his demeanor had shifted. He was quiet and excused himself early, saying he had to leave. My boyfriend seemed oblivious to it all. He answered his mother with ease, laughing at her jokes, unaware of the subtle malice in her words. At one point, while we were all sitting at the table, she turned to me and said, "I hope you understand how special he is. He's been hurt before by women who weren't good for him. I hope you don't disappoint him." I smiled, but I felt as though I had just been issued a warning. On the drive home, I commented that his mother seemed very demanding. He only laughed. "She's amazing. She just wants the best for us." I stayed quiet, but the thought of returning to that house didn't seem so appealing anymore. After that first lunch, a nagging feeling stuck with me. My boyfriend didn't notice my discomfort and continued to talk about his mother as if she were the most incredible person in the world. I tried convincing myself that I was overreacting, that her words had been simple misunderstandings. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. A few weeks later, he invited me to his mother's house again. I hesitated but eventually agreed. Maybe this would be a chance to improve our relationship. Maybe if I showed I was willing to integrate into the family, things would get easier. When we arrived, the reception was colder this time. There was no warmth, no excitement. His mother greeted me with a short, direct smile. As soon as we stepped inside, she asked me to help her in the kitchen, as if deliberately separating me from everyone else. My boyfriend didn't find this odd. He simply said he was going to talk to his brothers and left me alone with her. While we chopped vegetables, she started talking. It was less of a conversation and more of a monologue, as if she had been waiting for this moment. She spoke about her son's ex-girlfriends one by one, but always in a disparaging way. When she mentioned the eldest son's ex-fiancée, her tone turned almost disdainful. She thought she could control him, but in the end, it's the blood that matters, you know? Family always comes first. Her words hung in the air like a warning, and I realized she wasn't just talking about the past. She was sending a message to me. I didn't know how to react. Anything I might say felt inadequate, so I stayed silent, trying not to show how increasingly uncomfortable I was. But she didn't stop. She shifted the conversation to me, asking questions that didn't feel like genuine curiosity but rather tests. Where I worked, if I planned to stay in the same field, if I was already thinking about marriage. Every answer I gave was met with a comment. I imagine it must be hard to have a stable life like that, she said in a tone that wasn't exactly critical but far from neutral. When we returned to the table, the other brothers were already there. The eldest, as usual, seemed completely unaware of the deeper meaning behind their mother's words. When she mentioned his ex-fiancée again, he laughed, as if it were a harmless joke. The youngest, on the other hand, made comments that sounded like attempts to push back, but he always fell silent when she looked at him. It was as if she had a quiet way of asserting her authority. My boyfriend seemed to notice something but never reacted the way I hoped. When she implied he traveled too much and didn't care about the family, he tried to argue. "Mom, I have a life outside of home. You know that." But she responded without hesitation. "If your family isn't your priority, maybe you should make that clear. Don't come here anymore. I'll be fine on my own." He went quiet immediately. While everyone was distracted with dessert, she came up to me. "You seem like a strong young woman, but you've already realized things work differently here, haven't you? I hope you're prepared. This isn't an easy place for someone who doesn't understand the value of family." I didn't respond. I just smiled. But at that moment, the feeling I'd had during our first meeting came back stronger than ever. I didn't belong to this family, and deep down, she had already decided I never would. By the third time I visited his family's home, I didn't want to go. Something inside me told me to decline the invitation, but he insisted so much that I eventually gave in. He said it was important to him, that he wanted me to get closer to his family. I agreed, but I already knew it would only bring more discomfort. On the way there, he made a comment that unsettled me. "My mom's been asking more about you. I think she just wants to get to know you better." I pretended it wasn't a big deal, but the feeling that something was wrong grew stronger. When we arrived, she greeted us differently, with far less enthusiasm. As soon as we sat down for lunch, she began. "We were just talking about you the other day," she said casually. "He told me you've worked in a lot of different fields. It must be hard to find something stable." "Huh." My boyfriend laughed, thinking it was a harmless joke. I couldn't find it funny. Throughout the meal, she took every opportunity to draw me into conversations that made me uneasy. She brought up the eldest son as if trying to teach me a lesson. "Did you know he almost got married once?" But thankfully, that girl realized it wasn't the right place for her. Our family is very intense. Not everyone can handle that. Once again, no one reacted, not my boyfriend, not his brothers. It was as if her comments were perfectly normal. After lunch, she asked me to join her in the kitchen, as she had done before. While we washed the dishes, she dropped another one of her insinuations. "I heard you're not very close to your family." He mentioned it to me. That explains a lot. I froze, unsure of how to respond. She continued as if nothing had happened. "It's good that he knows. This way I can help him make the right decisions." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I realized then that this wasn't just about her disapproval. She saw me as a problem to solve. I wanted to ask her what she meant by that, but I held back. There was something in the way she spoke that made me uneasy, as if she were always one step ahead. When we returned to the living room, she acted as though nothing had happened, completely indifferent to our previous conversation. My boyfriend was chatting with his brothers, laughing like everything was perfectly normal. On the drive home, I asked, "Did you tell your mom about my family?" He seemed surprised but answered casually, "Oh yeah, I mentioned that you're not super close to your parents." "Why?" I brushed it off, saying it wasn't a big deal, but inside, my irritation was boiling. She had taken something simple, twisted it into a weapon, and used it against me without anyone even noticing. It was then that I realized I was completely alone in that house. A few weeks later, he invited me to a barbecue at his family's house. This wouldn't be like the other, more private gatherings. This time, there would be friends and family acquaintances. He was excited, saying it would be a great opportunity for me to feel more comfortable. I hesitated but agreed. With more people around, I thought his mother wouldn't have as much control over the situation. At first, the atmosphere was light and relaxed, until his mother appeared. She greeted us with a warm smile but wasted no time. "I'm so glad you're here. I want you to meet someone special," she said, leading me to the veranda. Before I could ask who she meant, she brought me to a woman standing near the railing, holding a glass of wine and chatting with his brothers. "This is Mia," she said, her tone practically dripping with excitement. "Did you know she was my son's first girlfriend?" "Oh, how I adore this girl." Mia turned and smiled at me, a smile that felt anything but genuine. She greeted my boyfriend with a warm hug that lasted just a little too long. He looked surprised but didn't pull away. I stood there, frozen, as she said, "It's so great to see you again after all this time. I miss how close we used to be." His mother stood by, watching me with an expression that bordered on victorious. "Mia is practically part of the family," she continued. "She's always been so dedicated to all of us. I think of her as a daughter." The discomfort in my chest grew. Mia stayed close to my boyfriend, occasionally touching his arm and laughing at jokes I didn't understand. Worse, he didn't seem to notice a thing. To him, it was just a friendly reunion. At one point, as I was serving myself near the barbecue, Mia approached me. "You must be loving being part of this family," she said, her tone sweet but laced with something else, something almost mocking. "They're so close, aren't they? Especially with people who really understand what it means to belong." Before I could respond, his mother appeared behind us, smiling. "Oh, Mia, you've always known how to fit in here. It's natural, isn't it? Some people just have that gift." Her words were directed at me, but I stayed quiet. My silence was the only thing keeping me from saying something I might regret. Later, as everyone mingled and chatted, I noticed Mia approaching my boyfriend. She laughed at something he said and placed her hand on his shoulder, leaning in closer than I liked. He seemed uncomfortable but didn't do anything to stop her. When his mother saw the interaction, her smile grew even wider. At the end of the night, as we were saying our goodbyes, she made a point to say, "Isn't Mia amazing? She's always so sweet, so connected to our family. That's why everyone adores her. Maybe one day you'll feel the same way." On the drive home, I asked my boyfriend why Mia had been there. He answered casually, completely oblivious to my irritation. "My mom must have invited her. They've always gotten along well." To him, there was nothing wrong. But to me, it was clear Mia wasn't there by chance. After that gathering, I felt even more isolated. My boyfriend started treating me like I was the problem, as if the tension with his mother was all my fault. To him, Everything that happened was just her way and a result of my inability to understand her. Slowly but surely, she was achieving her goal, pushing me away. Still, I wasn't ready to give up on him. Not yet. The next invitation came for a birthday lunch. The whole family would be there along with some close friends. I hesitated, but he insisted, promising it would be different this time, that he'd stay by my side the whole time. With a heavy heart, I agreed. When we arrived, the house was packed. She greeted us with the same fake smile as always, but her eyes cut through me like knives. "I'm so glad you came," she said, pulling her son's arm and completely ignoring my presence. During lunch, the subtle attacks began again. She brought up the ex-girlfriends of her sons with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Remember Mia? She was so dedicated to our family. She always knew how to respect traditions." The veiled insults piled up, each one feeling more intentional than the last. Then she said the lowest thing yet. "The truth is, some people just don't have the foundation to understand what it means to be part of a real family. But that's not their fault. It's the environment they grew up in." I knew that was aimed at me. My heart raced, but I stayed silent. I looked at my boyfriend, hoping for some reaction, but he avoided my gaze. It didn't take long before she grew tired of subtlety. "You know," she said, now directly addressing me, "relationships like this are fleeting. When things get tough, it's always easier to walk away than to fight for what really matters. Don't you think, dear?" She was looking straight at me now, no longer hiding her challenge. I took a deep breath. "If you have something to say, just say it. No need to hide behind these little jabs." The entire table fell silent. She stood up slowly, crossing her arms. "You think you can talk to me like that? In my house? Who do you think you are?" I stood up too, my hands trembling but firm. "I'm someone who's tired of being treated like garbage, while everyone here pretends it's normal." She laughed, but it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was cruel. Before I could react, she grabbed a glass from the table and hurled it at me. The glass hit my shoulder, splashing water over my clothes. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, my entire body shaking. "Showing you that you are nothing here," she screamed, stepping closer. Before I could brace myself, she slapped me across the face. The force turned my head, but it also ignited something deep inside me. Without thinking, I shoved her hard. She stumbled backward, falling awkwardly into a chair. She screamed, her voice dripping with hatred. "You will never be part of this family," she yelled, struggling to get back up. "I don't want to be part of this garbage family." I fired back, my face burning but my pride unbroken. My boyfriend finally stepped in, grabbing her arms to stop her from coming at me again. "Mom, stop it," he said, but his tone was weak, hesitant. The others watched in shock, but no one stepped in to defend me. I looked at him, desperate for some sign that he was on my side. Instead, he turned to me and said, "You should apologize." That was it. That was the moment I knew I was done. I grabbed my things and walked out of that house without looking back.